Hi, good evening everyone. Thank you for coming to problem solving session 10 of conservation geography. So we will pick up our conversation from the previous session and we'll now move on to the new topic which is about resources and conservation. And as always in this module, for this week there were three lectures. The first lecture was about land resources and agriculture. Second was water resources, and the third was about mineral and energy resources. So let's go over these resources one by one. What we're going to see in this session today or the week's lectures was about how these resources are present on the planet Earth, how are they distributed across the planet Earth and in different countries, and how are they used up, and what is the impact of their usage. So we'll get to understand all of these for all these three types of resources. But before we actually begin to look into resources, what exactly is resources? So, resource is anything that is a source of supply for something. It can be in support or it can be in aid, and these are ready to be withdrawn. So you can readily draw whenever you want. So these kind of resources, they are available, and if you are in need of them, you can draw them upon whenever you feel like. So here you can see that planet Earth has several resources. So for example, you have animal resources, wind energy, which is also a resource, oil resources, soil resources, coal resources, forest resources, water, and solar energy. So all these are different resources from which you can draw different kind of things at whichever point you feel necessary. Right now, when you talk about resources, you have natural resources and then you have artificial resources. Natural resources are resources, as you can see on the slide, it says resources that exist without the actions of humans, while artificial would mean the opposite, that you have human induced resources. So in natural resources you can have different kinds of resources. For example, you can see on this slide here, natural resources are like metal ores, coal and charcoal, water, agricultural products, natural fibers, minerals, natural materials, timbers, or anything, and crude oil. So these are resources that you have that you find on the planet Earth in nature without the intervention of humans. Right now, this can be abiotic or biotic depending on where it actually is retrieved from, but they are all natural in occurrence. So these natural resources are also divided into renewable energy and non-renewable energy, and we have discussed about this a lot. We have read about this a lot. Renewable energy are energy sources that are not limited by their supply. So, for example, biomass energy, wind energy, geothermal energy, hydropower energy, or solar energy. The source of these energy are not like they will not decay over time, but if you have non-renewable energy, there are sources which are which cannot be replenished, so non-replenishable. For example, fossil fuels or coal or natural gas or nuclear, so these come under non-renewable, you cannot renew them. So what is important, as I'm sure everyone will have an idea already, we're talking about non-renewable energy or non-renewable sources of energy. What the highlight here is that if you use it beyond a certain extent, then there is very little chance that they will be there for the future generation and they will get exhausted such that you cannot use it in future. But in renewable energy, the sources like sun, wind, these are always there and they will always be there. So you cannot, you cannot exhaust them. So they are renewable and you can use them more as compared to the non-renewable energy. So I have used several words, right? Resources, and you can use it. So based on what kind of resource is it, what is the level of usage right now? What is the usage of this, which can be possible in the future, or how much you can keep for future? All this can determine what is the classification of that natural resource. So, in broad sense, we can talk about actual resources or potential resources, stock resources or reserve resources. So we'll see what does each word mean. So let's say actual resource. So as you can see on the slide, actual resource means the quantity of the availability of this resource is known and they are being utilized in the current time space. So actual, as the name suggests, it's being in use, so you know where it is, you know how much it is, you know how much to use, and the most important part is it is being in use currently. So in recent times or in the present times, these resources are being used. Examples are soil and coal that are being in use currently. Now, next is potential resource. Now, as the word suggests, it has the potential of doing something. So, the quantity of availability of these resources is unknown and they will be utilized in the future when the technology for their use is developed. So, you know there's a resource there, but you don't know how much the resource is available and how to utilize them. But you know it's a resource, you can use it in future. You just need the correct technology which can be developed in the future to know how to use it. So those kind of resources that you kind of tap on because you know that it's existing but you can't use it right now, you might be able to use it in future. That's potential resource. Okay. Next is stock and reserve. What is stock? Stock refers to resources which are present in the environment, which can satisfy the needs of human beings but is not accessed due to lack of technology. For example, the two inflammable gases present in water, hydrogen and oxygen, can be used as resource, but this is not being done so due to lack of technology. Now, in stock, water is itself a resource, so you are using it, but you can implement certain new methods which you with which you can derive more from this resource. But currently there is no knowledge, there is no know-how how to use this. So it is because we are still unsure how to use it, we still don't know when can we potentially start using it. So it's a stock resource. While reserve resources are resources that can be used with the help of available technology, but the use of this resource has not yet started. The use of this resource may be reserved for future. For example, generation of hydroelectric power from river water is being done due to a limited extent. So now, what is reserve? Reserve is keeping something for reserve, right? Which means you want to keep something for the how do you say, something for the future generation. You know how to use it but you're not using it because you want to keep this so that the next generation uses. And remember, in the previous session we had spoken about sustainable development, where we said that in sustainable development it's not about only meeting the needs of the current generation or the current like the current population. You need to sustain that, you need to keep it for the future. So this kind of resources are kept in mind when you are thinking about sustainable development. You're trying to keep your reserve resources, they're reserved, they can be used by future generation. Stock is something you are piling up but you have no know-how how to use it. Potential, you know how to use it and you are sure that it will be used in future if you are developing the technology. Actually is what you are using right now. So these are the four kind of resources based on the usage and the timing of potential uses, right? Okay. So now coming to the topic that is the part of today's module. So all of these natural resources that we have just discussed, among this land is also land is also a natural resource, and land is used in several forms by different parts of the country or world actually. So you can see on this slide here, right? So let's start from the upper part of America or parts of Canada. What do you see here? These are boreal systems of the Western world. And then you have on the Asiatic component, you have the boreal system of the Eastern world. And then as you move across this map from one region to the another, you see the type of the land is changing. And this type of the land is based on what kind of vegetation is growing there, what kind of abiotic conditions are there, what kind of habitat is present there. So what you see is that there is no uniformity, and this we already know. We have already discussed this multiple times. There is no uniformity across the globe for anything for that matter. But for example, for here, if we restrict ourselves to land, even in land, you see that the type of land that is available to different parts of the world is not equal. See, for example, you can see uh, this green portion here is forest system, but then if you go to the light green portion, which are here, these are irrigated cropping system. If you go to the red one, there are intensive cropping systems. So now, what is the difference? What I was trying to highlight is, one is forest, which supports the biodiversity, which supports a lot of other values. But then the other ones, which are irrigated cropping system or intensive cropping system, these are croplands. These are mainly run by humans. That's for their domestication, that's for their use. They are doing it for agricultural purposes so that they can grow food that can bring them money. So the type of the usage of the land is also changing, and the type of food or type of vegetation that will be present on those lands are determined by humans, and that's not natural anymore. So that is also changing. So different parts of the world have different kind of lands, which is also altered by what kind of usage humans perform for that land. You'll understand this much better when I go over to the next slides. So moving on, like I've just mentioned, the way the land is being used has been changing over the period of time. And when I say land use over the long term world, I am concentrating on the human perspective, because it's human who are using these lands for their purpose, right? So here you can see, so this is a map which shows the land use over the long term, which is for covering the entire world. And what the graph is trying to show is the total area used for cropland, grazing, and built up areas. Built up areas means villages, cities, towns, and humans and infrastructures. So if you go back to the start of where it, let's say the reference point when it started, you see there were equal proportion of cropland and equal proportion of grazing. Grazing is basically the animals are moving around. Cropland is where you are growing plants or your vegetation for your business purpose or your livestock purpose. Now, over the period of time, you see that both of these, I'm so sorry, both of these area under the particular type of usage is increasing. So green is also increasing, red is also increasing. See, until you see suddenly in the later 1/3 of the graph, it suddenly shoots up. It means that in the recent world, the usage of land for crop or for grazing, which is livestock rearing, has increased to a very high extent. And you will see what can this lead to. So basically, on this slide, what you are trying to understand is we're looking at the land usage patterns, and it seems like that there is a shift from using minimal amount of area for human purposes to suddenly shift, which you can see the increase is almost 4 times. Earlier it was less than 1 billion, now it's more than 4 billion. So it's actually more than 4 times. So you see what the shift has been, the rate of the shift has been. Now, what are these land actually being used for? I said cropland, but what is actually these crop? What are the type of crop that are used? So, of course, these are all food crops because they are used for, like production of food that drives the economy of the country. So you can see on this slide, majority of the crop or majority of the land that is dominated by cereals. So the major crop that is dominating the land use pattern is cereals. That's followed by coarse grain. And in the recent years, you see an uprise in the oil crops as well. Well, there are minimal portions of pulses, roots and tubers, fruits, vegetables, tree nuts. So all these are food types, plant sources, or different type of like culture, which are used for the production of food, among which cereals are dominating by a way greater margin. Oil crops have recently, as you can see this map here, curve here, recently started to take increasing pattern, right? Right. Now, this was about if you see the world at a glance, right? Now, if you break down this into per area or per region of the globe, what you see is an array of colors. The colors here are trying to show the very same thing, production, level of production. So when you see an array of colors at a global level, you see that there is no distribution pattern to it. It's very randomly distributed. There is no equality. It's very dispersed. So, for example, here you see, right, cereal production from the year 2022 is shown for, like cereal crops like maize, wheat, rice, barley, rye, and millet. So, those production taken together, also you see that these regions in Africa, they have very little production of cereal. But then if you move towards Asia, you suddenly see a very darkening color. So these regions are actually producing more cereals. Compare this to this region, which is intermediate. India is falling somewhere second closer to the eastern part of Asia. Now, what does it say? It says that all these different regions have their own need for cereal production, which is for the sustaining of their community or economy, and they produce it at a different pace. And I will come to the problem of all these differences when I finish these part of my discussion. So this was about cereal production. Similarly, when you look into wheat particularly, cereal was including, if you go back here, you will see that in cereal you have maize, wheat, rye. I told you it's clubbed together and we are seeing this. When you break it down to just wheat production, you see even more disparity. You see no production or very minimal production in African region and some way parts of South America. But then you have most of the contribution from the Asian part of the Asian continent, right? From India, from China, you see that these regions have way higher wheat production than rest of the world. Next, similarly, if you now look at rice, and it is very intuitive that rice is produced at a very large scale in India, and that's why India is right now dominating here, as you can see in this map. This map is from 2 years back, and you can see that even then, India is along with, of course, Asia, because India and Asia, the staple diet is rice, and you see the production of rice is too high because the demand for rice is too high. While countries like, you can say again, parts of Africa, parts of South America, they contribute almost none to very little rice production. Now, these are about wheat, rice, which are also part of cereal. Moving on to another food crop, which is potato. Now, if you see potato also, you see India is very towards the upper strata of the countries who produce potato. While you have countries like, again, Africa, even Australia for that matter here, and later portion of South America, who contribute very less. So in all those slides, you can see the recurrent phenomena is the distribution of resources is not uniform, and the way the resources are being utilized is also not uniform. Some are producing way more, so what are they doing is they're converting land into the production of, so for their production, so they are converting land from one form to the other. So there is more conversion of land in those countries because the production pace is required to be higher to meet the demands of the country. While in some countries there is no demand, maybe there is no resource, maybe there is demand and resource, but they are not able to utilize it to the fullest point. So you see this disparity all across the, if you look at any phenomena, we'll see in a few more slides, this is very prominent. I spoke about potato. Let's move to fruits like banana. Again, you see, in fact, in potato, you see in the Europe and Asia, Upper Asia, there's absolutely no data, so we don't know what's actually going here. But when you actually try to look at the coloration, you can see that Europe has very little production of banana, while Asia, on the other hand, again has very, very high contribution to banana production. And then moving on to something like sunflower seed, again you can see here that Asia with Europe produces most of these sunflower seeds, and you have very less contribution from India here, right? I'm pretty sure you would hardly heard any agricultural patch which is being used for sunflower seed production. But then in the other countries, especially in Europe, there is more demand, so they are growing this in way more content than we do. And lastly, moving slightly away from the food crops, you have tobacco, which is again, you see in Asia and India being one of the highest contributors, while the rest of the world seems like they hardly produce any tobacco, right? Right. So before I go to the next part, what I wanted to see is wanted you to realize is that all across these different graphs, India mostly had the darker colored part. So and the trend line, the coloration for the darker meant that they have higher producing for that particular crop. So India has been towards the upper strata most of the time, and that kind of says that we are an agrarian driven economy. So yeah, that point just come out when you look at different, and these are just very few of the maps that I've shown. In the lecture, Fraser has discussed many more such maps of different type of crops, and you see the very same pattern, right? Now, what we just discussed was plant-based, and plant is not the only food source that you have. We also have animal food source, right? So now let's look at animal food source and how are they utilized in our country. So we look for global meat production right now to look at this value, and you see again you see there is an increasing trend of the production first of all, and the countries not only are increasing the production but they are maintaining the status. What I mean is, let's say here it was Oceania producing more meat, so they have continued to do so by increasing their production rate. Asia, if you see, has not only increased, it has increased to a very greater extent. So if you look at this area under the curve, you see it's very dense, very wide. So it means it started from a very minimal number, which was very less as proportion to the other countries, but now it has also increased as much as proportionally to the other countries as well. So now it is also producing very high content of global wheat, maybe not as much as the ones which are in the top tier, but still it is being used. Now here you see Africa is among the lead. If you saw in all the previous maps, Africa was showing very bland color. That means they were not producing that much of crops. But when we come to animal food, you do see Africa taking a high stand. This could be because the demand for meat is higher there, or the resources there is amenable for meat production. And it's not just about meat. You also have fish, right? We are also producing fish. We are also producing seafood by aquaculture. So you see a trend for that as well here, right? Again, very disparate based on for fish production. Generally, you will rely on a presence of a water body where you can fish and you can collect fish, and then you can rear them so that you can rear them at a first of all economic level. So a lot of factors dominate what kind of production and what kind of economy that country has. Now, moving to the important part of this entire scenario, we have several kind of food which is being grown, and different parts of the world are using their land in different proportions for the food production. But what is it actually doing? It is actually contributing to the greenhouse gas emissions, and by extension it is increasing, it's contributing to global warming. Now if you see global emissions and overall distribution of the sources, so most of the emissions come from non-food, but we also have emissions from food. Now when you say you have emissions from food, it's not very intuitive, like what exactly and where exactly is the emission coming from. So let's break this 26% further and zoom and see how much and what is exactly the one that is contributing. When we look into zoomed portion and look at how each sector of food is contributing to emissions, you can see that broadly 18% comes from supply chain, 31% comes from livestock and fisheries, 27% from crop production, and 34% from the way the land is used. So land use itself contributes to emissions. So if you leave out the supply chain, if you look at the produces from these like the food sources in itself, so livestock and fisheries contribute methane. There is emission from manure management, pasture management, and fuel use in fisheries. Those contribute 31%. Similarly, for crop production, you have emissions from these different feeds and crops, And then land use, again, the way the land is being used for livestock and again human food, that itself contributes 24%. So you see that even food production contributes to the greenhouse gases, which makes it a point of concern. And this is again what was discussed in the lecture. As you can see, in all these different kind of impacts, land use impacts, freshwater use impacts, eutrophication, biodiversity, we have read this, right? So let me just read it out for you once again. So if you see land use, 50% of global habitable land is under problem. Freshwater, 70% of global freshwater withdrawal. Withdrawal is basically how much of the water are you removing from the natural resources. We will see this in the next session, I mean next part. Eutrophication, as we all know, it's a pollution of the lakes and the freshwater. And biodiversity means that 94% mammal biomass, right? So it comes from the livestock. Eutrophication, 78% comes from agriculture. Freshwater use is 70% is used for agriculture, and land use has equal amount of agricultural use as well as other uses. So you see every sector where you can have potential impact on the biodiversity and environment, livestock and agriculture contribute in a great proportion. Now, if we talk about greenhouse gas emissions by food, which food contributes more to the greenhouse gases, this is the map for that, or this is the chart for that, and you can see the beef, lambs, all the kind of meats produce more of the greenhouse emissions than you have poultry, fishes, and then towards the end you have groundnuts, pulses, and peas. But you do have emissions from all these different kind of food products. Now, that was about food individually. That was, before that we had just looked into how it is being contributed. If you see the share of these emissions from food across the world, I know it should not have to be repeated again. I do not need to, because you can see the disparity already very clearly. But you can see what I want to highlight is that you have some regions which are contributing so much to the greenhouse gas emissions, and then you have regions that do not contribute at all. But overall, when you see, the greenhouse gases emissions from food are very high. It is about greenhouse emissions, but then also there is one more parameter, which is nitrogen emission. That also is influenced by croplands, and again it has different share from different parts of the globe. Now, why are we even talking about these different share and there is different GHG emissions and nitrogen emissions? Because all of these have impact. What kind of impact? First is deforestation. Deforestation, very easy to understand. You are basically clearing off parts of natural forest so that you can use that land for your agricultural purposes or whatever you want to rear for that purpose. And when you do deforestation, we have read multiple times that deforestation can have multiple issues. Soil erosion being one of them. Increased sedimentation. Climate change. If you have GHG emission, you have climate change. Then you have increase in soil salinity, increase in soil alkalinity. So the properties of the soil itself is changing. You have death of soil biota because you are using too much of fertilizers, manures, pollinators, and biodiversity because there is biodiversity loss, because you're clearing off patches of forest, so you have biodiversity loss. Water logging and water contamination, we have looked into this earlier. Eutrophication, like the dumping of the runoff from these agricultural fields into the lakes and ponds. So this eutrophication, deaths, these all lead to disruption of food chains, disruption of water flow. And then there are land subsidence, pollution, and the impacts of genetically modified crops that are also to be considered when you look into the impacts of food production, right? So the overall theme or overall takeaway from this lecture was that yes, we have land resource, but we have been extensively using those resources for food production, for livestock rearing, and excessive of anything has repercussion, and these on these slides are those very repercussions, right? Okay, so now to summarize, as always, I have put out 10 questions which I could fit in from the entire lecture, and hopefully this will be able to explain this lecture a bit more, right? So the first one is low concentration ores come in the category of which of these resources? Next, those resources that have been surveyed but we lack the technology to use them. What do you call such resources? Next, global agricultural land use is dominated by which crop type? Which is, of course, I'm pretty sure you would, if it should be easy for you to guess. And which of this is the largest source of nitrogen oxides? We already discussed nitrogen. So when you go into the lecture, you will see that professor has also explained how can those nitrogen or these different kind of emissions come about. What are the causes of those emissions? And then you have the part of actual resource that can be developed profitably in the future. These are what kind of resources? I'll take a pause for 30 seconds and then I'll give up the answers. So to give the answers, low concentration ores are reserve resources because they are low concentration, so you want to keep them for future generation use. Resources that have been surveyed but we lack the technology to use are stocked because we don't know how to use them yet. Global agricultural land use is dominated by cereals. Which of these is the largest source of nitrogen oxide? Mobile sources. And the part of actual resource that can be developed profitably in the future is again reserve resources. Okay, so the next set of questions. First, hydrogen for nuclear fusion comes under which category? Which of these is the largest source of sulfur oxides in the atmosphere? So along with GHG emissions and nitrogen, you also have sulfur oxides which are also being contributed into the atmosphere, and this also has its own impact. Next, those resources that may be used in the future belongs to which category? Which of these does not contribute to the increased smog in Delhi during winters? And lastly, those resources that are currently being used after surveying, quantification and qualification belong to which category? Right. So coming to the answers, the first one is hydrogen for nuclear fusion come under the category of stock resources, which you can use in the future. Which of these is the largest source of sulfur dioxide? It is electricity generation. Those resources that may be used in the future are potential resources, as you know. Which of these does not contribute to the increased smog? Carbon dioxide. The other three, they are responsible for smog. Carbon dioxide is for increase in the temperature, and here we are talking about smog, so it's basically smoke and fog together, and that's because of particulate matter. So PM10, PM2.5 and nitrogen oxide, these are contributing to those particulate matters. And those resources that are currently being used for surveying, quantification that is currently being used is the key term, that's actual resources, right? So that brings us to an end to the first part of today's session. Let's move to the second part, which is water resources. So this we already know. We have already discussed this extensively when we did the hydrosphere problem solving session. So here you can see that water is distributed unevenly up on the earth. Most of the earth or most of the water is contained in the ocean, which are unusable because they are salty. So the remaining portion 2.5 is being held by wet fresh water, and even lesser than that is in groundwater and lakes. Among freshwater, most of them are capped in the polar ice, very few in groundwater, and then there is very low proportion of ice, snow, and lakes and soil and atmospheric water that we had discussed, right? Marshes and river, and even the biological water. So these are different, like sources or where you can find water. So basically, the overarching theme here is that you have very less water available for use. And rightly so, when I say that, if you see the internal renewable freshwater resources, if you look at in comparison to the world, you see here which part of the world has more of resources by region. So you can see how much of the inflowing river basin and recharging groundwater aquifers does those regions have, and it's very high. It's considerably high in Latin America, with very less in the Middle East and North Africa. Understandably so, because they are not surrounded by water body. But then also that amount that is available to them, or the land, the usage is very less. It gets restricted because of this much availability. So this is what I was saying when I was talking in the previous part about withdrawals. Now we will see. Now for the land, we saw what kind of production is happening, what kind of food crop is being grown, what kind of livestock is being reared. For water, we will see for what purpose are the water being withdrawn, right? And how is that across the globe? So the first one is just annual freshwater withdrawals. Basically, annual freshwater withdrawal refer to the total water withdrawal without counting evaporation losses from storage basins. Uh, Total water withdrawal are basically the sum of withdrawal for agriculture, industry, and municipal uses, which is all the domestic uses that we have, right? Withdrawal also include water for desalination plants in countries where they are a significant source. So any purpose, for any purpose, when you are taking water from the natural resource, that's withdrawal. And again, if you look into the proportion of the withdrawals across the globe, there's huge disparity. Be more concentrated in the Asia and the Indian subcontinent. Now, like it's mentioned, right, that water withdrawal is, or when you say annual water withdrawal, it basically encompasses all the reasons why you are withdrawing water from. So, in this, we are breaking it down to agriculture. How much are you actually withdrawing for agriculture, and how is that distributed across the globe? And you can see agrarian driven economy withdraw most water as compared to the countries which do not rely on agriculture, but they have other potential sources of income in form of life rearing stocking, where they can possibly withdraw water, but that's not what we are looking here right now. So that is agricultural. And so the previous one was how agricultural withdrawal is happening. This slide shows share of the agricultural land which is irrigated. So water is used for irrigated, right? So you basically are withdrawing, and how much are you using for irrigation of your land? That tells you how much water is being used. Okay, because we have no data for most of the part, it looks very blank. But when you have this data, it will look like the ones that you have been seeing so far. Now, industry is another major withdrawal, like the ones that majorly withdraw water. So if you see again industrial water withdrawal, it is mostly in those regions which are relying on the industrial usage. So you can see the countries which have more industries have more withdrawal when you look into the industrial water withdrawals. And to understand what is exactly part of this, what data has actually gone into this map. So basically this industrial water withdrawal measures the annual quantity of self-supplied water withdrawn from industrial uses. This includes water for the cooling of thermoelectric and nuclear power plants, but it does not include hydropower. So not the product, but the water that is being withdrawn for using or making sure that these units work, the cooling of these units. Water withdrawn by industries that are connected to the public supply network is generally included in the municipal. So that's the next one that we will see. Anything that is to do with public is part of municipal. And here you will see municipal water withdrawal, which is water withdrawal for domestic purposes, right? And this is directly used by population. More the population of the region, more the water withdrawal, which is in perfect corroboration here. So you see, the withdrawal of water is not only heavily influenced by agriculture and industry, but also by humans, because they also need water for their daily uses. Now, when I say humans and when I say population, one very important term that comes up is what is the water withdrawal per capita, per human. More the population, more the water withdrawal is just what I said, right? But that's not the case. When you see, actually, it also depends on how much you are, withdrawing, and how much are you actually, how much are the humans are actually using. So when you do that, you see that the map reverses, and it's mostly in the Canada that the water withdrawal is highest per capita, right? Because right now the water is not just for municipal purpose, it's for everything taken together and then divided by the number of population, right? So that gives you an idea about how much the population is using the water. What is the share of people in the withdrawals of water? So now what we will see is how much. So this was all about how much are you withdrawing, right? Now we will see how much are you withdrawing from fresh water and how is it distributed across the countries. So for example, here you have OECDs, which are members of, so you can see it here. OECD are basically members defined as countries who are members in 2010, and their membership was carried back in time. BRICS are Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa, and then ROW are the rest of the world. So you see, trend that is easily recognizable is that there is an increase in the amount of freshwater use across the globe, which is very highlight, which is concerning, as we will see. Because water is limited, the more you use up, the more these resources per capita is decreasing. The available resources for usage is decreasing, and not a very difficult thing to understand. Why? Because we are being using it at a very rampant pace. So for any country, you see it's either constant even after so much usage, or it's actually decreasing. So the resource per capita for freshwater purposes are actually reducing. Now, one way you can take a measure to not create further problem for these water is by maintaining the pristinity of the resources itself. So what I mean is, we are withdrawing water from, let's say, lakes, okay? So, and we do know that we have water which is dumped into these lakes by industrial runoff, agricultural runoff. So what one can do is treat this water before it is being dumped into the any part of the soil. But that also, as you can see, is not being done at a very constant rate, and it is important because if you don't treat waste, you add on to the problem that are already cascading because of several other reasons. So that's what brings us to what can you actually do for conserving water. First of all, you reduce the usage as is this, and as we are already aware of reducing the usage. We have been told, right, that don't use water if it's not necessary, don't use this, don't use that, don't keep your tap open, fix all the leaky faucets, leaky pipes, because we are trying to conserve water. We are doing rainwater harvesting so that we can use that water that we have collected from rain for recharging our groundwater. This was discussed as a case study in the lecture by professor who himself set up a rain garden. So if you missed out, if you couldn't understand the importance, it's the importance of the fact that they are used being, you can do simple changes around you to conserve water, which is very, very important. So one is, of course, reducing the usage, so you don't use it. Second is you somehow increase recharge. So basically you can increase recharge is basically increasing the level of water that is already there, and that you can do by collecting rainwater and putting it back into the groundwater to recharge it. And lastly, of course, protect what is available. So whatever we are doing, if we don't start with protecting the currently available material or currently available water bodies, then it makes no sense. So when you say reduce usage, it's not just us at home. Of course, us at home, that's of course what one should first and foremost think of. You're walking out of your washroom, close the tap, ensure it's properly closed. If it's leaky, get it fixed. But also at agricultural and industrial scale. So at agricultural scale, you can use sprinkler method instead of, which is very precise in the amount of water that is being sprayed, and you don't waste too much of water. Similarly, industrial water consumption can be reduced by using method that reduces the wastage of water that is being used. So these all come under reducing the usage. Increasing discharge is basically afforestation. So basically, you are trying to replant the water. You are trying to, like use up. So you basically have. So like I said, right, deforestation leads to drying of land. If you plant something on the soil, it would obviously retain moisture. It will have the water being stored there. Saving the wetlands, what is already there, and we have seen wetlands. They are so important for our water resources, as our water resource. So save those wetlands. And rainwater harvesting is something that we already know about, right? We collect the rainwater and we then try to use it for different purposes. And lastly, protect what is available. First of all, start with sewage treatment. You have wastewater, you have sewage. Treat it before you are actually putting it back into the nature. And what we as humans can do, if we can't do anything else, let's just start by not polluting the water bodies. This scene is so distracting and so disheartening that people just dump their wastes right next to the water body, and it could be also in the water. These are here because they were brought by the waves and they were put onto the shores. But cleaning of beaches, cleaning of shores, not dumping their material just like that here and there. These are few things that one can do at their personal level to protect water. Lastly, green chemistry. Green chemistry is basically, like the newer field of chemistry where you can produce everything in an eco-friendly manner, which doesn't hamper the nature at a very great cost. And so these are all different methods to conserve water and to understand the importance that water as a resource is also depleting. Okay, so that brings us to an end of this part, and we will summarize this part in 10 questions. But before I give you the answers for these questions, I would like you to read and see if you can understand and get to the right answer. So the first one is, which of these is not an ideal way to reduce water consumption in agriculture? Right? Easy question. What you should not do if you want to conserve water in agricultural field. Next is using of paving blocks in place of concrete, basically blocks and not concrete walls. What does it? So you use that for conserving water, but what is it actually doing? Which of these regions have the largest freshwater withdrawal as a share of internal resources? If you can remember from the map. Rain gardens are primarily meant to do which of these function? And wetlands are a major source of recharging, yes, but recharging what? Right, coming to the answers. The first one says, which of these is not an ideal way to reduce water consumption, which is just random spraying of chemicals. Rotation grazing, cover crops, and mulching, which is basically, trying to cover with a patch of soil, is basically all that you do to reduce water consumption. Next is using paving blocks instead of concrete. It recharges the groundwater. Next, I'm sure it would have been easy. Which of these regions have the largest freshwater withdrawal? Among these, India. Rain gardens are primarily again meant to recharge groundwater, and wetlands are one major source of recharging the groundwater. Right? Okay. Moving on to the next 5 questions. Just a second. Yeah. So internal renewable freshwater resources refers to the quantity of internal freshwater from inflowing dash and recharging groundwater aquifers. So basically, where are the water? Which are the water inflowing water that is considered when you speak about internal renewable freshwater resources? Next is, which of these is an advantage of mulching? Which of these regions have the largest internal renewable resources? Which one among these is odd one out with respect to protecting the existing water resources? And lastly, plant sources of food are much more water intensive as compared to animal sources of food. Do you think this statement is correct or not? Or do you think you cannot compare these two scale of information? So coming to the answers, Internal renewable freshwater resources refer to the quantity of internal freshwater from inflowing river basins, okay, and the recharging groundwater. So basically, when you say freshwater, you mean river water that is inflowing, that and the groundwater taken together is the freshwater resource for any country. What is the advantage of mulching? Which so they are preventing the weed growth, conserving moisture, and preventing erosion. All of these. Which of these regions have the largest internal renewable resource? This was there in the lecture. It was South America. Which one is odd one out with respecting to protecting the water resources? Talking to representative green chemistry and garnering support. These are ways of protecting rainwater harvesting. So this comes under the phenomena. What kind of um, like principle you are adopting to conserve water? This rainwater harvesting comes under increasing recharging. So the other three comes under protecting the existing resources. And the last one, plant source are more water intensive than animal source of food. That is completely wrong. It's the opposite actually. Animal source of food, but that basically means rearing of livestock is more water intensive than growing a crop, right? With that, we come to an end of the second part, which is about water resources. We started by saying that how much of the water is actually available for use and how have we increased the usage of water in the past few years or decades, and how has it impacted the nature, and what should we do currently so that we conserve and reduce these impacts. Okay, now we have already discussed about land and water. The last part for today's session is mineral or energy resources. Now, we already know about minerals. We have discussed this extensively in the problem solving session, which was dedicated to rocks and minerals. So I don't have to describe it once again. But what you need to know for today's discussion is what kind of minerals do you actually have? If you just remember from what we have studied, you'll remember there are metallic and non-metallic. But here, when you talk about minerals, we also include energy minerals when we speak for mineral from a perspective of economic. Right? So minerals can be metallic and non-metallic. Metallic is basically containing iron, so iron, nickel, or being ferrous. Non-ferrous like copper, lead, tin. It can be non-metallic, absolutely no metals at all, limestone, sandstone, marble. But it can also be energy minerals, for example, coal, petroleum, and natural gas. Okay. So this on the slide tells you these are resources and how are they distributed across the globe, right? Now, you can clearly see some very nice white patches among the triangles and the circles, which kind of shows you that there are some regions which are concentrated with mineral ores, and then there are some which have no minerals or whatsoever. So when you have mineral ores, only then can you exploit the mineral for your usage. If you don't have, that share of energy source is gone away from you. So you have these regions here in between, in South America, in Australia, patches here in Asia, in this part of the world, which is again adjoining region of Indian subcontinent, where you have no minerals. So you see, right from the word of go, which is about distribution of the minerals, there is disparity between different parts of the world, and that's what is being highlighted in all the three parts of our session today, right? Now, zooming in only to India, you see again, India also has very sporadic distribution of minerals. You have high mineral content in the some regions, while some regions have very few type of mineral ore that is present, right? So, for example, Ladakh has bauxite, but then Orissa has multiple of limestones, lead, coal, and manganese. So you have these different regions that have different amount of mineral ores and that are extracted for usage. Like any other resources that we have been discussing so far, the resource demand for minerals is also increased over the period of time. And what you see now is, as time has progressed, not only has the energy consumption for the mineral increased, the types of different mineral uses is also increased and diversified. So earlier you see it was mainly the traditional biomass energy. Then we had coal. Then later in 1950s you had some proportion which was in coming from coal and some from oil. But if you now look, you have energy consumption from traditional biomass, coal, oil, and natural gas, and then you have nuclear, wind, hydropower, all these new fuels that you have discovered that are renewable in nature, that are also being used for like they're also being driving the energy consumption. So right now the energy that is being driven from these resources are mostly contributing to the electricity production, and you can see a proportion goes hand in hand of how much they are contributing in primary energy consumption and how much they are actually contributing to the electricity production. So you can see that primary energy consumption basically also includes electricity production, and the usage pattern is similar to what we have just seen in the previous slide. Now if you now see it, so this was about mineral resources, right? Now you also use primary energy from fossil fuels which are not renewable. If you now see this map, it shows about which country uses how much, and you have some regions which are using which have 100% of the primary energy from fossil fuels, means they are using everything from fossil fuels itself. So this is problematic because fossil fuels are not renewable. So once fossil fuels gets exhausted, how do this country thrive? That's a problem, and that's thing to be concerned of. Now again, if you see fossil fuel consumption, how much fossil fuel is being used per capita. If you have per capita, US always is dominating because small area, more population, has you can calculate more per capita there as compared to India, right? India is way lower. But what does it mean? It means that the average consumption of energy, which is from coal, gas, per person, is very less in India. It's very high in US. They are using energy, but India is not able to meet the needs of the population that it has, right? And like we have seen in this map, there's a primary energy consumption. This one says in primary energy consumption you have different kind of usage. This is about electricity which is from fossil fuels, and you can now again see that some regions are relying 100% on fossil fuels for their energy electricity production, and that's concerning, right? Now fossil fuels have been dominating the region or dominating the world for electricity generation, yes. But what is the need of the hour? To switch to renewable sources or other sources of energy. And you can see that there is a gradual shift in the use of renewable and nuclear sources and a decrease in the use of fossil fuels. But this is a trend that should be maintained and should be carried forward in the future as well. Right. So if you break down fossil fuel, what exactly are we talking about when we are saying fossil fuel? We're talking about coals, we're talking about gas and oil. So those, of course, now it makes sense, right? These are used for energy consumption, and these are the proportion in which they are used for the energy consumption. So now this is a 2020 chart which says based on how much we are using fossil fuel right now, we have only these much years or time remaining for the fossil fuels before they get exhausted. Coal has 139 years, oil has 56, gas has 49. These numbers could be in double digit, but they are very concerning when you look at the global scale. 49 years, basically less than 50 years for a resource to get over is basically nothing. It's like real close. We need to do something immediately or we will lose these extensive source of energy from the face of the planet, right? And these were of course issues that are concerned with fossil fuels depletion. But when how do you exactly get to the fossil fuel? By mining. And we have also discussed extensively mining. The process itself can have several problems associated. For example, deforestation, water pollution, soil erosion. All these problems have been discussed in multiple slides in multiple ways, saying the same story that mining can have several problems associated. So, one important thing towards the end that I would like to discuss, which was part of the lecture this week, was how do you go about it? What do you actually do when you have such issues? The first thing, these are few ways you can manage your land or manage the region which, so mining leads to degradation of habitats. So how can you improve those habitats? These are the different ways to do that. The first here is land recovery. Now land recovery is basically, in one simple word, you don't care about the land, but you let it be. Nature will take its own course. So you don't touch it, you put it as it is, and you will see in few years, nature has taken its own course and it is replenishing it on its own, right? So that's land recovery on its own, but not every time this is possible. The other method is land rehabilitation. What is that? So here you are shifting the degraded habitat towards greater value, not necessarily the original state. So you are changing the you can say the land not to how it was previously. That's not important. You are changing into a value, something which is of value as per your requirement or as per your understanding. So you are rehabilitating it, but you necessarily don't have to go back to the original state. Next is land restoration. Here it is basically you are actively trying to return the habitat to the original state. So in land rehabilitation, you are improving the quality, but you are making it something new. You are not bounded to return it to its original state. Restoration concerns with returning to the origin. If the original land was, let's say, a grassland, you will make efforts to make your barren land back to a grassland, right? Now, other way is enhancement. So here in enhancement, you are basically improving the value of the habitat. So the habitat, you are making changes to it such that its value increases. So you are enhancing the value. And lastly, you have replacement. So basically very easy to understand, right? You are creating a new habitat in place of a degraded habitat. So basically you can make a new habitat, you can increase the value, you can change the land to something which is of a different value or can be the same as the original state, or you can just not do anything and let it recover. So all these are simple methods that you can adopt so that you see changes in the land and you are able to protect these habitats better, right? And along with all of this, you also look into increasing efficiency of the resources that you have. So here you have an energy intensity map. So energy intensity is basically primary energy consumption per unit of GDP in a country. So you're basically saying that, you know, I am of course, using resources to gain energy. Let me try to maximize it. If I maximize it, then at least whatever I am giving back or whatever I'm producing is benefiting my country economically as well. So you can try to increase that, and you can see some countries are working towards that and they are trying to increase their efficiency. So you can also rely on the existing method and try to improve the methods of energy extractions. Right. And lastly, you can see that if you see GHG emissions by sectors of the different regions which are you are extracting minerals and you are using for different production. Among this, if you are using it for electric generation, that's causing the maximum GHG emission, followed by transport, which is not difficult to understand. We are using, like fuels, which are causing pollution. Then you have manufacturing, agriculture. We have already discussed this, and then you have the other, sorry, you have the other resources or other methods that are contributing to GHG emission. So what this slide is trying to show you is basically taking all the 3 lectures from today and summarizing it and saying that all these contribute to GHG, but because all of these individually are on an increase for production or for usage, the concurrent increase in GHG emissions are also taking place, which is having further issues for the environment. So the shift should now be towards renewable energy, and you do see shift in the global level, and this is what the trend is currently, and the expectation is this should increase in the future as well. But these are all at global scale, at different scale. For me to end today's session, I will edit this slide. At a personal scale, to reduce GHG emissions, to reduce pollution, to reduce the problems associated with mining, to conserve our resources, we can do all of these, or we can do these one at a time at a personal scale. So we can reduce, reuse, and recycle. This is what we have been learning. I'll just reiterate once again. As we know, the resources are finite. We need to make ample use and efficient use of the resources. We are not using things and throwing them away. We try to reuse, recycle them, maximize the utilization potential. We can adjust our behavior. We can switch off unnecessary lights. We can use more energy efficient devices. Use more insulation to prevent loss of heat. Change clothing. Use full loads in washing machine instead of doing it bits by bits. That leads to more water loss. You try to put more clothes together. You're trying to. So what you're trying to do is a simple step, right? If you are taking less number of clothes that you are washing it per day, so you have less number of clothes and you are using water. You are putting 5 days of effort for a week to wash clothes. Instead, if you on the sixth day sit with all those clothes and use a washing machine, that reduces the workload and also the amount of water that is being used for cleaning the uh, clothes. So simple switches in behavior. We can go solar, and you can use solar cookers, solar water heaters, solar panels instead of relying on electricity driven geysers or other sources such, right? And we can talk to people around us and highlight this need for conservation of resources, and you know and instill this feeling, or instill this need for conservation, and highlight the importance of these in people around us, so that not just us but people around us also follow the same, and collectively we contribute towards the conservation. And you can also use these passive heating and cooling. So you can use shades, curtains instead of ACs and heaters. Try to use more passive way so that you can conserve on electricity and reduce the consumption. So all these are at personal scale, and they come with determination. If you feel like that you should do it, you're definitely bound to find ways that you can do it, and it might take time for you to adjust, but you will at the end of the day, and you will feel great because you're contributing towards conservation of the resources, right? So with that, today's session comes to an end with the set of 5 questions, and 5 questions at the next slide, and with that we'll finish this session. So let's come to these questions. First is, which of these does not make a region economically feasible for mineral extraction? So basically, what does not contribute to a region being called as amenable for mineral extraction? Next, which of these states in India does not have appreciable quantity of minerals? This I only did because this was discussed in the lecture. So just for your information, that you should also know which state in our country has more of minerals. Next, for improving degraded habitats, in the case of what of the strategy, you are using a new habitat, or you are creating a new habitat in place of a degraded habitat out of these 4. Which of these refers to use of shades or curtains to reduce consumption of resources? And last, for improving degraded habitats, in the case of again something, you neglect the habitat and let nature takes its own course. So coming to the answers. Right. So the first one is, which one of these does not make a region economically feasible? Having sedimentary rock doesn't make a region amenable for mineral extractions. Igneous rock, sea coast, and placer deposits contain minerals, so they have mineral deposits. Which of the states in India does not have appreciable quantity? It's Uttar Pradesh. When you are replacing a degraded habitat with a new habitat, it's replacement. This we had just discussed towards the end, right? If you use shades or curtains, that's basically passive cooling. And if you are neglecting the habitat and letting it take its own course, that's recovery. Right. And the last 5 questions. For improving degraded habitats in the case of dash, the degraded habitat is shifted towards greater value, but you don't have to necessarily return to the original state. Which of these is an impact of mining? Which of these is the largest source of ammonia in the atmosphere? And which of these contribute the greatest to greenhouse gases or GHG emissions? Lastly, which of these is not a way to reduce the impact of mining and extraction? Coming to the answers, right. So for improving the degraded habitats, when you are shifting the habitat to a greater value but not necessarily returning to the original state, it is rehabilitation. When you recover or when you return to the original state, it was restoration. Which of these is an impact of mining? All of these: soil erosion, water pollution, deforestation, everything is a side effect of mining. Ammonia is contributed mainly by animal manure. GHG emissions are coming greatly from the electricity. And lastly, if you want to reduce the impact of mining and extraction, you don't do short-term studies, you do long-term studies, and then use the results from those studies and apply them in the management plan. Just a second. Yes, so improving the degraded habitats or preventing spills and accidents, avoid setting up of oil rigs. These are all different ways where you can reduce the impact of mining and extraction. So basically in today's session, we looked into different ways of conserving or first of all, different resources that are available for usage on this planet. Because in the previous session, we looked at sustainable development. So for any sustainable development, you need to first understand what are we trying to maximize here? What are we trying to use in our globe or in our planet currently that we should reduce the impact for? So to understand that, we looked into today's session where we looked into three resources: land, mineral, and water resources. Now, to connect it to sustainable development, we knew these resources, we have known these resources for a long time. What we didn't know is how they are getting impacted at a regular level because of our activities. And when we now know this, how do we reduce this impact? So let me just briefly talk to you about it. So land resources we are using for agriculture, we are using for livestock, we are also using land for fish and any kind of economical activities. But for all those activities, what are we actually doing? We are clearing off natural land that is available. So what is actually happening? The available resource is getting depleted and the quality is reducing and its functional value is decreasing. And we are not realizing this because when we are doing this, what is in our mind is the production scale. And of course, at production scale, we are increasing, definitely. But is that not at the cost of environment was the entire question here. And we did see that if you are doing deforestation, it comes with its own problem. If you are rearing plants, that has its own problem. If you're rearing animal, that has greatest GHG emissions. So that has its own problem. So over usage of anything leads to a problem. So that we look from land perspective. Then we came to water. All this agricultural activity requires water. You need to spray water on the ground so that the plants grow. So where do you get this water? You get this from already limited fresh water that you have in the planet. So you take that from the fresh water and the form of withdrawals. You use it for your agricultural purpose, you use it for your livestock rearing. But what you are not realizing is that one, you are depleting the resources. Second, if you are using water, water also comes off as waste product. So water is getting wasted in many several forms instead of being used. So waste that is coming from sewage, the wastewater from sewage, the wastewater from agricultural runoff, which are called industrial runoff. These have so much of nitrates and minerals in them that when they reach the land, it leads to eutrophication. That's a different level altogether. And then you have because you're not utilizing the exact amount of water that you are withdrawing, you are leading to loss of water. So you have these water losses that is happening at a very high rate. What is the intention behind us studying this is we realize the importance of water resources and we try to conserve water. We have, I am sure everyone would have seen ads and television commercials about water conservation, and now when you read about it, it makes more sense because water conservation is very important so that you sustain the future generation on the planet. And lastly, we looked at mineral resources. Mineral resources was important from the perspective of electricity generation. First of all, your electricity, your transport vehicle, they run on fuels, mainly driven from fossil fuels. Fossil fuels are non-renewable energy sources. They are depleting at a rate that they will get exhausted within few years, and then how will we continue? So what is the switch here? We should try to look for renewable sources of energy so that we continue the production of our energy consumption methods, electricity generation for example. But at the same time, we do it in an eco-friendly manner, so we don't have GHG emissions, we don't have any associated problem, we don't have mining problem, we don't have any mining associated environmental degradation problem. So with one change, we can bring so much of control over the destruction that is happening to the environment because of our regular activities. So the entire lecture series for this week was about understanding the importance of these resources and how do we go about conserving these resources. Right, and with that I come to an end of today's session. If anyone has any doubt, please let me know, or we will see each other in the next session.